Hello everyone, it's been a while hasn't it? I just got back from a week away with my girlfriend and a load of stories happened over the last week, meaning lucky you boys, I'll probably be doing a catch-up stream this week. However, since it's my first video back after a short holiday, I thought I'd go with a subject that I find very easy, and that happens to be bashing the Church of England, because as a Catholic I have to take every opportunity I can to bash the Church of England. And what I'm bashing them for this particular week is the ordeal that they have with Calvin Robinson. Now, for those of you who don't know, Calvin Robinson is a conservative political commentator, appearing quite a bit on GB News, and generally being pro-British and anti-woke. He's probably about as right-wing as you can get and still be in mainstream media. So I don't have any particular problems with him. But then again, I'm not the Church of England. And I bring this up because for some time now, Calvin Robinson has been training to be ordained as a Church of England priest, which I do think is a good thing. I think becoming a priest is a good life goal if you have such a life goal. However, he hit a bit of a road bump. He put out a tweet on the 16th of April. "I am not being ordained in the Church of England this Petertide. It seems that having conservative views and orthodox Christian beliefs is a big no-no. Go woke, get promoted, go scriptural, get booted. Clown world. We need to return the church to God." And in that tweet there is a link to an Express article, but I'm going to move over to the Times because it's got a bit more detail on what's going on. "You don't know what racism is, trainee priest Calvin Robinson told." Now what makes this very funny is that Calvin Robinson's actually black, or possibly half black, I'm not sure. Point being, he's not white. And it's important to point that out because the Church of England seems to be going along with every woke current thing going, and so because of that, obviously, they believe in institutional racism, and they also, for some god-forsaken reason, think that racism is equal to power plus prejudice, which obviously is just a cope to try and say only white people can be racist. So telling a non-white person he doesn't know what racism is quite funny, given that more than likely it was a white person saying that to him. Anyway, on to the article. The anti-woke TV presenter said that he felt betrayed by a bishop who secretly lobbied to stop him becoming a priest. Calvin Robinson has been blocked as a priest by the Church of England after the Right Reverend Rob Wickham, the Bishop of Edmonton, privately warned church leaders against ordaining him. Robinson, a social commentator, was an assistant principal at a school where Wickham was a parent. Robinson has now joined a breakaway conservative Christian movement and plans to create a new parish for fellow traditional worshippers. He claims his case shows that bishops have become gripped by fashionable opinions about race and sex, while those in the pews retain more traditional values, which is more than likely true. And I'll mention it now but explain it better later, but this has basically been the problem with the Church of England since at least the 80s. Basically, the Church of England is an agnostic institution that does not have God at the heart of it, at least when it comes to the priest and bishop class. As Calvin Robinson says, this doesn't appear to be the case with the actual churchgoers in the pews. But as I say, I'll explain that point later. Robinson gained a high profile as a black conservative social pundit before he gave up his role as a teacher and Department for Education consultant to begin a 2-year course as an ordinand, training for the priesthood at St Stephen's House, Oxford University in October 2020. He was due to be ordained a deacon, working part-time as assistant curate at St Albans Church in Holborn, central London. Robinson said that he was shocked to be told in February that his ordination was likely to be problematic. He applied under the Data Protection Act to see the information the church had on him, and my God did they have information on him. He discovered that the Bishop of Edmonton had been reporting him to church leaders since he began his studies. Robinson went on Good Morning Britain in September 2020 to say that he was against Black Lives Matter because it was increasing racial tensions and believed that everyone in this country had an equal opportunity to succeed. The same day, Wickham wrote to the Right Reverend Salah Mullally, the Bishop of London, to bring to your attention, Calvin Robinson is not only a political commentator, but he's an ordained and former teacher in this area who has just started at St Stephen's House. Calvin's comments concern me about denying institutional racism in this country. Can you see what I mean? The Bishop of Edmonton, he is white. I mean, here's a picture of him if you don't believe me. And this is just full in the face, the biggest contradiction that is one of my favourites of wokeness, in that they will constantly go on about how diversity is our strength and we need more diversity and all this. And I know this is a very 2016 point, but it's still a very salient one. But basically, we're not going to have a black priest because he's too conservative, i.e. he doesn't fit in with what the Church of England sees as moral goods, which is essentially the Church of wokeness, in that you need to believe that institutional racism is everywhere and we need to put black people on a pedestal and all this stuff. And yet you have a black guy dissenting from this, and it's, oh no, we can't have him as a priest, he can't join our club. Which would make sense if he was an atheist, but he's not. He's really trying to do what he feels is the work of God. And obviously he's following the Church of England's ordination process to the book. But because the Church of England talks more about politics than it does about morality, obviously following God's scripture is not the way to go forward with them, as Calvin Robinson is finding out. In December last year, Wickham wrote to the Right Reverend Emma Inneson, Bishop to the Archbishop of Canterbury, and also to the Bishop of London. Wickham sent them some of Robinson's tweets, adding, "These are clear examples as to why his ordination should be looked at very closely." Robinson said that he felt betrayed and a bit heartbroken at Wickham's conduct. He said, "To hear that people are campaigning behind your back after you have given them all that you have got, I don't know how to put it into words." Church sources said that Wickham's status as a parent at the school had no bearing on this matter. I don't think anyone was accusing him of that. Robinson said that he requested a meeting with the Bishop of London, who told him, "Calvin, as a white woman, I can tell you that the church is institutionally racist." He described her attitude as hushed condescension. And I love this. As a white woman, I can tell you it's institutionally racist. As a black man, I can tell you it's not. If she said sexism, it'd make a lot more sense. But kind of pulling out your woman card, but not having the race card, to try and say that someone or something is racist doesn't make any goddamn sense. But to be honest, these bishops and priests, they're basically just paid performers in the Church of England. I know I'm being very insulting to them, but I'm Catholic, so it's okay. The TV pundit who now works for GB News accused the Church of apostasy by moving away from core tenets of the faith. They need to focus on Scripture because that's the Word of God. Yeah, well, they moved away from that since at least the 80s, as I keep saying. He said that he had now joined the Global Anglican Future Conference and would be ordained to one of its parishes. "My hope is to attract all the people who feel that the Church of England doesn't represent them because it is obsessed with woke issues." A spokesman for the Diocese of London said, "We wish him well in the ministry he is now going to exercise." So there you go, we have a 21st century church split in the Anglican Church, which basically means we're kicking someone out because of their secular beliefs, not because of their religious beliefs. Because the power of black lesbian womanism is clearly above that of God. And Calvin Robinson was obviously so upset by this that the Mail on Sunday let him have a little section to write about why it upset him. Because obviously it's going to upset you. You have ideals of becoming a priest and hopefully helping other people in their faith, and you've been told, yeah, you're not allowed to do it because you think Britain's actually a rather nice country. That's essentially what it's come down to here. So Calvin Robinson, why do the white middle-class clergy find it so hard to accept that I don't see racism lurking in every corner? And the answer is because they don't get money if they accept that there isn't. Sitting in an ornate study in the Old Deanery, a 17th century mansion house opposite St Paul's Cathedral, the Bishop of London put her hand on my arm and quietly said something that left me astounded. "Calvin, as a white woman I can tell you that the church is institutionally racist," the Right Reverend Sarah Mullally told me. We had been discussing the church's race policy, which I had been vocally objecting to for some time. The bishop could not understand that as a black man I simply did not share her and the church's hierarchy's view on this contentious issue. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, had proclaimed that the Church of England is deeply institutionally racist and called for a radical and decisive action. Last year, an anti-racism task force recommended using quotas to boost the number of black and ethnic minority senior clergy, introducing salaried racial justice officers in all 42 dioceses, and launching Racial Justice Sunday once a year. Because at the end of the day, it's just a job program scheme for the most useless people on the planet. Literally, it's for people who can't do anything other than complain. So now, yet again, we've got to put white people down, and not only that, we've got to create jobs for people to do nothing but complain that these quotas aren't quite filled yet, while at the same time pushing for people to read people like Robin DiAngelo, Ibram X. Kendi, and other American authors that should basically have no influence over the Church of England, but they will do, because the Church of England is American secularism. I fundamentally disagreed with this approach, which is based on a faith in diverse left-wing critical race theory instead of teachings of Christ. I believe it is divisive and offensive, and not only that, it's anti-Christian. He doesn't say that, but I don't know why he doesn't say that. I've experienced plenty of racism in my life, but it has always been down to a minority of malicious individuals. I do not think the claim that either the church or wider society is institutionally racist has ever been supported by robust evidence, and the reason for that is because it never has. The Bishop of London's hushed condescension during our meeting made me realise that any dissent from the Church's ingrained view, which to me seems nothing more than virtue signalling, is not welcomed. The Church claims it wants to listen to the perspectives of minorities. Well, I am one of them, but it doesn't appear to want to hear my view because it also happens to be a conservative one. And this is just unfortunately what happens when you have a church that doesn't have God at the centre, but basically the English people. It works up until the point where the people that are front and centre of the Church of England are seen as the bad guys. And so now, despite the fact that it is basically being supported by the English, it also has to say that the English are bad people. And so it's in this state of perpetually saying that the institution is a terrible thing, but at the same time saying it's a good thing to fight against what the institution itself represents, which in this case is institutional racism. Apparently the church is doing a very good job at fighting institutional racism, despite the fact that everyone in it says that it is institutionally racist. So why these people don't leave and create their own thing that isn't institutionally racist, I have no idea. Well, no, I do have an idea. The reason is just because there's money in the Church of England, and that's basically it. Anyway, Carvin Robinson goes on, during a Zoom call, the Bishop of Fulham, the Right Reverend Jonathan Baker, told me that there had been a lot of turbulence over some of the views I had expressed online and on TV. It was no secret that the senior figures in the church disliked me. I am, after all, a traditionalist, which means I do not believe in the ordination of women, and I have never been afraid to voice my criticisms of the church's drift away from what I and many of its parishioners think are its core values. I do not expect everyone to agree with me, but what I did expect is the right to express my own opinions. I'd always been taught that the Church of England was a broad church. Yeah, well, it is in the fact that they will make cope and seething arguments to allow agnostics and basically atheists into the priest and bishopry class so they can basically get a paycheck every month. It's not broad in the fact that if you actually believe in God, you'll get anywhere within the church, because bringing it back to God is frowned upon. And it's funny as well, because when they did start allowing women to be ordinated as priests in the Church of England, there was an exodus of Anglican priests to the Catholic Church. And in fact, one of my friends at school was the son of an ex-Anglican priest who became Catholic because he didn't believe in women's ordination. So why Carvin Robinson is so adamant to remain in the Church of England, I'm not so sure. Maybe he truly believes it's the one true faith. But I admire the tenacity of it, and I also admire the fact that he is making it mainstream, showing that the Church of England is actually just one big scam. I later discovered that the church leaders in London appear to have had deep misgivings about my ordination from the very beginning of my training, despite spending more than £20,000 of parishioners' money on sending me to study theology at Oxford. Emails that I have obtained via data protection rules revealed that the bishops at the very top of the church had been closely scrutinising my public comments. His political agenda is, I guess, what you would call libertarian, anti-woke, anti-identity politics, COVID sceptical, the Bishop of Fulham wrote in one email. His tweets get him in trouble sometimes, and there have been complaints to the Bishop of London that he shouldn't be ordained. There have been complaints usually just means I am complaining and I assume others agree with me. That's what there have been complaints always means in these cases. But my god, the horror of someone being libertarian, anti-woke, anti-identity politics and COVID sceptical. Well, guess what, dude? They're pretty common positions for the people of Britain. And even if they're not anti-Christian beliefs anyway, so I don't get the issue. But one particular email stood out, and it was the one by the Bishop of Edmonton saying Calvin doesn't believe in institutional racism. But why was this white, middle-class clergyman so worried about my perfectly legitimate view that Britain is not riven with systematic racism? A very good question, and even I'm fed up of white people telling black people that institutional racism is pushing them down. Because it's not often you'll get someone like Calvin Robinson who pushes back on that idea. A lot of them will take it to heart, and then it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then you end up obviously needing all these diversity and inclusion initiatives, because all that white liberals have ended up doing is telling black people they can't get anywhere. So they say, oh no, you can get somewhere with my help. It's literally just causing a problem and then making money trying to fix a problem that they caused. It's actually really horrible when you think about it. But this is the world we live in. So he goes on to say, if the church is institutionally racist, as the Archbishop of Canterbury insists, then why have he and other senior figures, including Stephen Cottrell, the Archbishop of York, and Sarah Mullally, the Bishop of London, not resigned? After all, They have all been bishops for years, which suggests that they've been unable to solve the problem. Yes, well, this is the thing. They don't really believe it. They're just saying it because it's fashionable, and as I say, it gets them their paycheck. And it's not just issues of race and gender. It seems the church will affirm any liberal, progressive, secular view, but clamp down on conservative views, either political or theological. If you defend family values, the sanctity of marriage, all human life being sacred, or the fact that God made us male and female, you'll face opprobrium. Just say criticism, dude, what the hell? Something has gone wrong. The established church has entered apostasy, and the faithful masses in the congregations and the hard-working clergy deserve better. Since my ordination was blocked, I've been contacted by clergymen and lay people up and down the country who have been sharing their stories of how they've been silenced by the church for holding conservative views. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if that's true. I just wish they were a bit more public about it. But hopefully Calvin come out into the media with all these accusations of apostasy and basically saying the church is just another arm of the woke institutions, then hopefully more people will come out about it and something will be actually done about it. Am I thinking wishfully there? Yes, of course I am, but I'm an optimist, so what can I say? And he finished his article just by saying church attendance is declining, because of course it is, and that he's moved on to that Global Anglican Future Conference to hopefully become a parish priest for that church. So there we go, Calvin Robinson is not allowed into the Church of England because he is anti-woke, anti-identity politics, and was a COVID skeptic. Which, all of those things, completely secular issues. The church shouldn't really be delving into those type of issues, beyond going on the morality of it. Which, from a Christian perspective, they all seem horrible. And anti-Christian, as I said, at least from my Catholic point of view, and, apparently from Calvin's Protestant point of view. Though I don't know why he isn't a Catholic, but there we go. It's a different issue altogether, that. But I've been making a lot of claims about the Church of England in that a lot of the bishops and priests are just there to get a paycheck and they don't really believe in God, but are basically just there as socialites. And I've been saying this has been happening since the 80s. Now, what makes me say this is the television show Yes, Prime Minister. And a particular episode of Yes, Prime Minister was called The Bishop's Gambit, released in 1986. And the thing with Yes Prime Minister and Yes Minister, its predecessor, is that basically the whole show was written by reports that came out directly from Westminster and from reports from the civil service. In fact, they got some scandals in the show so accurate to real life that the writers were actually investigated by the intelligence services to see if they were spies. So what I'm saying is that the writing and the jokes in Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister hit quite close to home and are actually quite realistic. These were close to real problems that we had in Parliament and in the civil service, and the clip I'm going to show you is no different. So for reference in this episode, the Prime Minister, Jim Hacker, has to choose a new Bishop of Canterbury, as that's what the Prime Minister does whenever a Bishop of Canterbury steps down. But this is the scene where he learns an awful lot about how the Church of England actually works, and it's absolutely no surprise that this would be true in the 1980s. And because it's been true since the 1980s, we now lead up to 2022, where now if you even hold a relatively normal position from the 1800s, you are seen as the worst type of person and should not be allowed to be ordained. So without further ado, let's get right into the clip.
What's a modernist in the Church of England?
Well, the word modernist is code for non-believer.
You mean an atheist?
No, Prime Minister. An atheist clergyman couldn't continue to draw his stipend. So, when they stop believing in God, they call themselves modernists.
And again, this writing was drawn from real-life counterparts, so from Prime Ministers, from the Church of England's reports and the secret goings-on between them. So, there were a lot of atheists in the Church of England in the 1980s who didn't want to leave the church because otherwise they wouldn't get their stipend or their pay for being a priest or a bishop. And that's not all I've got to show you from this clip, because this clip just explains so much about what's going on almost 40 years later, which is just mental.
How could the Church of England suggest an atheist as Bishop of Bury St Edmunds?
Well, very easily. The Church of England is primarily a social organisation, not a religious one.
As I say, 1980s, barely anything to do with God, everything to do with the chattering classes.
Is it?
Oh, yes. It's part of the rich social fabric of this country. So bishops need to be the sort of chaps who speak properly, know which knife and fork to use.
There you go. It matters a lot more that priests and bishop in the Church of England are uncontroversial and fit in with the higher echelons of British society, which in those days, obviously, as you can hear there, it was mainly about speaking in that upper-class tone and knowing which cutlery to use for which meals. These days, it's just admitting that institutional racism is going on and apparently following everything that the government says when it came to a pandemic. And it even got to a point where breaking COVID rules was literally worse than committing adultery. Following the government's guidelines was more important than the Ten Commandments. I have a clip from the Bishop of Manchester here.
I'm more worried about the fact he failed to keep the social distancing than I am about the fact that he was a middle-aged bloke having a bit of a fling.
Yes, I still have that clip from when I covered Matt Hancock having an affair with one of his assistants, which ended up breaking up 2 families, probably ruined 4 or maybe even 5 kids' lives, I can't even remember at this point. And here's a bishop of the Anglican Church basically saying, yeah, adultery doesn't really matter, I don't really care about that, but the fact he broke lockdown rules, I'm a lot more concerned about that. And as you can see from this Yes Prime Minister clip, that seems to have been the case since at least 1986, and was probably the case even earlier than that.
Cheers.
Is there really no other possible candidate?
Well, not really. There are a couple of better jobs available recently, you see. No, well, the Dean of Windsor is a better job, or Westminster. Such preferment enables one to be on intimate terms with the royals.
Being a bishop is just a matter of status. A question of dressing up in cassocks and gaiters.
And this is why I basically called them paid actors before. You don't need to believe anything as a priest, you just need to turn up, do mass once a week, and then be seen to be part of whatever the mainstream clique is these days. And this is why Calvin Robinson has been banned from the institution, because he'd probably get in there and realise he has to be a leftist, otherwise he's going to get kicked out anyway. And obviously you've got to keep that secret, because the main way you get money as the Church of England is by having parishioners, and if parishioners knew this, they wouldn't bother going. And as Calvin said, this is part of the reason that church numbers are falling in Britain, especially for the Church of England.
Well, the church is trying to be more relevant.
To God?
No, of course not, Prime Minister.
I hope you can see why I like this clip. It's an absolute slap in the face to any Anglicans out there.
So the ideal candidate from the Church of England's point of view would be a cross between a socialite and a socialist.
Precisely.
Man, this was true back in the 80s. Of course, if you just have this entire wing, this massive institution in the United Kingdom that is just for the chattering classes who happen to be socialist, is it any wonder now that most of the higher-ups there will not let someone like Calvin Robinson in because he's a libertarian? I mean, come on, think about it. The Anglican Church needs to be plucked up root and stem and be brought closer to God. It's a religion, for God's sake. Anyway, I'm cutting quite a bit of this clip out because I really encourage all of you to watch the entirety of Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister. It makes you really want to gut the civil service and really makes you question what ministers are actually there for. But after explaining that the candidates that the Prime Minister has to pick between have basically never been ordinary vicars and instead have been political activists from within the church, they basically say that vicars are the ones who actually care about God and the community and all this, and the rest are just paid political activists. And these are the troublesome type of people who we have seen kick Calvin Robinson out of being ordained. But I am putting in some of the best lines I think we will ever get to describe the Church of England.
You see, the church is run by theologians.
How do you mean?
Theology is a device for enabling agnostics to stay within the church.
It's all a show, it's all a charade for political actors who are very high up, which wouldn't be too much of a problem if they were pro-British, if basically they were Calvin Robinson, but the problem is they're not. They are innately anti-British, because it is the most uncontroversial position to take these days. But at least one thing's true about the Church of England.
The Queen is inseparable from the Church of England.
What about God?
I think he's what's called an optional extra.
So there you go. If that doesn't convince you to watch Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, I don't know what will. But this is the thing. If you're Anglican, I don't really blame you if you keep it to within you and your vicar. You're probably okay. But when it comes to then the political activities of the church, something needs to change because it's just ridiculous. Putting anything before God in a church is obviously not a successful church in terms of trying to get people to be spiritually fulfilled. But that's apparently the role of the Church of England and has been for some time. So don't be surprised if more stories like this come out. Whether it will change anything, I don't know. But hey, as I said, I mainly took this as an excuse to bash the Anglican Church. I hope the Anglicans will still follow me. Anyway, That's all I had for you for today, so as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.